Ever feel like the world's running on a script and nobody bothered to give us the cliff notes?
Or like a play, but the stagehands are about to lead a revolt.
Okay, you got me there. And speaking of revolts, today we're tackling a text that's been called a lot of things. Blueprint for revolution, a call to arms, maybe even a how-to manual for regime change.
Let's just say it sparked some lively debate over the years.
That's putting it mildly. So buckle up, everyone, because we're deep diving into the Communist Manifesto. You all sent this one in, and let me tell you, it's a doozy. But we're not shying away from the heavy stuff.
Absolutely not. This is a text that demands to be grappled with on its own terms.
Love it. No skimming the surface. We're going full deep-sea exploration on this one, which means going straight to the source. Marx and Engels, in their own words.
And those words were written in a very specific time and place. To really get it, we need to take a trip back to 1848.
All right, so set the scene for us. 1848, Europe. What's the vibe?
Think less champagne and waltzes, more cobblestones and barricades. Europe in 1848 was a powder keg, ready to blow. You had all these long simmering tensions, poverty, inequality, political oppression.
And a whole lot of folks saying, enough is enough.
Exactly. The French Revolution was still a fresh wound, a reminder that even the most entrenched power structures could be toppled. And now, this new idea was starting to circulate, gathering steam. Communism.
Not just an idea, really, but this specter, this looming threat that had the ruling class looking over their shoulders.
They weren't imagining things. Even before the Communist Manifesto hit the printing presses, there were already uprisings, worker strikes, a palpable sense that the old order was starting to crack.
Which is what makes that opening line of the manifesto so chilling, right?
Yeah.
A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. Talk about a mic drop moment.
Oh, they knew how to make an entrance, and they weren't being subtle about who they were coming for. Remember those bastions of old world power we talked about? Metternich, Guizot? The manifesto calls them out by name.
Throwing down the gauntlet right from the start.
Like, yeah, we see you trying to hold on to power, but the tides are turning. It's a direct challenge, framed in this almost biblical language of good versus evil, light versus darkness.
So they're not just presenting a theory, they're issuing a warning.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe even a prophecy.
Right. This isn't some dry academic treatise. It's a call to action infused with this urgency, this sense of inevitability. Like, buckle up, folks. Change is coming, whether you're ready or not.
And at the heart of this call to action is this idea of class struggle. Like, that's the engine driving all of human history, according to Marx and Engels.
And they weren't just talking about it in some vague theoretical way. They pointed to concrete examples throughout history. Freeman and slave in ancient Rome, lord and serf in the Middle Ages, even guildmaster versus journeyman as cities began to grow. Each era had its own version of the haves and the have-nots, locked in this struggle for power and resources.
So they're seeing these patterns, these echoes, throughout different historical periods, almost like it's hardwired into human society.
Right. And in their own time, they believed they were witnessing the latest iteration of this struggle, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat.
Okay, so before we go full steam ahead, let's do a quick level set on who we're talking about here. Bourgeoisie, proletariat. It's not exactly your everyday water cooler talk.
Right, gotta decode the jargon a bit. So think of the bourgeoisie as the haves of the industrial age. The factory owners, the entrepreneurs, the folks with the capital, literally.
And on the flip side, we've got the proletariat, the working class, the folks clocking in and out, making the whole system actually, function.
And the manifesto argues that this time, this particular showdown between the haves and the have-nots, it's not just another historical blip. It's a clash with the potential to upend, well, everything.
Because now it's not just about who gets to sit in the big chair and call the shots. It's about the very tools, the machines, the whole means of production being up for grabs.
Exactly. And to really get this, we have to give Marx and Engels some credit where it's due. They actually saw the bourgeoisie as a revolutionary force, in their own way, at least at first.
Hold on, revolutionary. But these are the guys destined for the chopping block, right? At least according to the whole, revolution thing.
Sure, but think about it. To become the top dogs, the bourgeoisie had to dismantle the old feudal system. They were all about breaking traditions, embracing innovation, saying, hey, those old rules, yeah, those don't apply anymore.
Yeah.
They were all about factories, global trade, progress.
It's kind of punk rock, actually, when you put it that way.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, they were the ones who really kicked off the Industrial Revolution, opened up global trade routes, created the very world we live in today, for better or for worse.
Okay, so they were agents of change, big time. But somewhere along the way, things went sideways. This is where the whole exploitation part of the story comes in, right?
Right. You see, Marx and Engels argued that the bourgeoisie's relentless pursuit of profit, their need to always produce more, expand markets, it created this system that couldn't survive without exploiting the very workers who made it all possible.
Let's unpack that a little. They're saying that paying someone a wage for their labor, that's inherently exploitative.
It is when the folks who own the means of production, the factories, the land, the raw materials, hold all the cards. The proletariat, with only their labor to sell, are forced to take whatever wages the bourgeoisie offer just to survive.
So they're trapped in this system, even as it makes the bourgeoisie richer and more powerful.
Exactly, and that creates what Marx and Engels called alienation. It's this feeling of being disconnected, not just from the things you produce, but from the very act of working itself.
Like you're just a cog in the machine, not a human being creating something meaningful.
Right. And this alienation, they argued, wasn't just some unfortunate side effect of the system. It was fundamental to how capitalism worked. The more efficient and dehumanizing the system became, the closer the bourgeoisie came to, and I'm quoting here, creating their own grave diggers.
Wow, talk about foreshadowing. But how did they see this whole system actually unraveling? It's not like workers were just going to spontaneously down tools one day and launch a full-blown revolution.
No, it wasn't going to be that simple. Marx and Engels believed that the road to revolution had distinct stages. It starts with those everyday struggles. A strike for better wages here, a protest over unsafe working conditions there.
Just trying to get by, really.
Exactly. But as workers experience the power of collective action, something bigger starts to happen. They develop what Marx and Engels called class consciousness.
So instead of seeing themselves as isolated individuals, they start to identify as a class with shared interests and a common enemy.
Bingo. The manifesto actually points to things like the rise of trade unions and the fight for labor reforms, like that 10 hours bill in England.
The one that finally limited the workday to, well, 10 hours. That was a pretty big deal back then.
Huge. It was a major victory for the working class and proof that organized labor could challenge the status quo and win concessions from the powers that be. For Marx and Engels, this was just a glimpse of what a truly class-conscious proletariat could achieve.
So let's say the proletariat, they reach that tipping point, that class consciousness. They overthrow the bourgeoisie. Then what? Everyone just starts sharing their stuff, like some kind of utopian potluck.
Well, not exactly. The Communist Manifesto isn't just about tearing down the old, it's about imagining a radically different future. And Marx and Engels get surprisingly detailed about how this new world might actually function.
All right, hit me with some of these radical ideas.
Well, one of the most famous and controversial is the abolition of private property.
Yeah, that one tends to raise some eyebrows.
For sure. But before everyone starts barricading their backyards, it's important to remember what they meant by private property. It wasn't about taking away your toothbrush or your favorite record collection. Their focus was on the means of production.
So, factories, land, resources, the stuff that actually generates wealth.
Yeah.
That should belong to everyone.
In a sense, yes. They envisioned a society where these things are owned and controlled collectively, not by individual capitalists. The idea was to break the cycle of exploitation, create a more equitable distribution of resources.
Starting to sound a little like, dare I say, a modern-day progressive's dream.
There are definitely echoes, but then they go even further, talking about things like free education for all children, a heavily progressive income tax, and get this, the eventual withering away of the state itself.
Hold up. No more government. That's a bold move, Cotton.
Right. Their argument was that once class distinctions dissolve, you wouldn't need these traditional power structures anymore. People would naturally cooperate and work for the common good. A utopia, in theory at least.
A utopia that definitely faced some pushback, to put it mildly. I mean, this wasn't exactly a universally beloved manifesto.
Oh, they were stepping on some very powerful toes. One of the biggest critiques, even back then, was that abolishing private property would lead to, well, mass laziness. Why bother working hard, innovating, striving for anything if everyone just gets the same rewards regardless of effort?
It's the classic why bother argument. Still gets thrown around today in debates about social safety nets and economic equality.
Exactly. And it's fascinating to see how Marx and Engels countered that. They argued that laziness wasn't some inherent human flaw, but a symptom of being alienated from your labor, trapped in this soul-crushing system. They believed that when work is meaningful, when it serves a common good, people would be naturally driven to contribute, to create, to innovate.
So basically they were saying, don't judge a future communist society by the yardstick of the capitalist one you're currently stuck in.
Precisely. They were asking people to imagine a completely different paradigm. They also had to address concerns about, well, the family. The manifesto calls for abolishing the bourgeois family, which, let's just say, didn't go over well in all circles.
Yeah, that's probably putting it mildly.
Yeah.
Talk about poking the bear.
Right. But their point, and it's a subtle one, was that the traditional family structure often reinforced existing power dynamics and inequalities. They believed a communist society would develop new, more egalitarian ways of caring for one another and raising children.
Less about abolishing families altogether, more about rethinking how we as a society care for our most vulnerable and structure those relationships in a way that's fair and just.
Exactly. And we can't forget, they were writing all this in the mid-19th century. Their ideas were bound to be provocative, even shocking to some, but that's what makes the Communist Manifesto such an enduring document. It forces us to confront these fundamental questions about power, equality, the very nature of work and society, questions that are still very much alive today.
No doubt. Love it or hate it, the Communist Manifesto is a historical document that refuses to die. It's a time capsule of 19th century anxieties and aspirations, but it's also, in a strange way, a reflection of our own time. Whether you see it as a visionary roadmap or a cautionary tale, it throws down a challenge to look critically at the systems we live in and ask ourselves, what does a truly just and equitable society look like, and how do we get there? Keep those questions in mind, everyone, and until next time, happy deep diving.